Ready to rock?
What's up?
All right, we are live, baby, with the OpenSecret team. Anthony, Marks, what's up, guys?
Hey, good. How you doing?
Good to be back. I feel like a lot has changed since the last time we recorded.
A lot has changed in many ways. For one thing, you know, you got your ears lowered a little bit.
I mean, the hair. You don't have the hair anymore. Yeah, got the plugs. I mean, I've always had these.
Always had those. No.
Yeah, no one could see. Yeah,
I noticed the plugs. I thought they were cool. I'm still rocking the hair though, so I'm keeping it tight. But who knows? Maybe the next time we meet, we'll switch places. I don't know.
No, the hair is iconic.
You gotta keep it.
You got to keep it. Well, first of all, I'm stoked to have you guys in town. As you can see, we're recording from the normal PB studio. Got the bridge in the background, which is
the fog cleared about 2 hours ago.
Yeah, thank you guys. You brought the sunshine from Texas. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
It's actually been pretty cloudy there right now. So
oh, really? Yep. Okay, all right. So all kinds of things are reversing. So there's a whole bunch we want to talk about today. You know, I was sort of highlighting for you guys stuff around open source AI, around confidential compute, and then maybe some crazy digital life evolution. But first and foremost, maybe let's get started with why you guys are in town. I understand y'all are in town for LlamaCon, which for those of you who don't know is the sort of, I guess, at least US premium open source model from Meta. Why are you guys here? Tell us, give us a little bit of a sense of what's going on with the open source front on Llama and open source AI in general.
sure. Yeah, so Meta is trying to position themselves as the forefront of open source AI development. They're trying to be the opposite of OpenAI, which is really closed AI.
Right.
And so they've got kind of a startup incubator group within Meta, and so they reach out to people and then invited us to come check out what they've got going. They want us to use their tech. We're already using Llama 3.3, but so we want to get on the new stuff. And so we're here tomorrow, going to go to a couple keynotes and start networking with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe Orange Pill Zuck as well. I think he's already got a goat named Bitcoin.
He does, yeah. Bitcoin Maxi, yeah. So maybe we'll meet Zuck. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll try.
We've got a couple opportunities.
It'll be sweet, man.
Yeah.
So high level, before we jump into the specifics of what you guys are building on there, just give us like a sense of what's going on in the ecosystem, man. The last time you and I chatted over a year ago, you know, open source was lagging. What I would have guessed was maybe 6 months, maybe even as much as 18 months behind the closed source models, you know, particularly OpenAI's and Google's. Where do we stand today? How close is Llama to the frontier?
You know,
Depends on which benchmark you use.
well, it depends on the benchmark. Depends if you go by the official benchmarks or not, or the or that. But
or the Vibe benchmarks. Give us those.
Honestly, it's I mean, they're still lagging.
Yeah.
I will say that. I mean, you know, DeepSeek had a really interesting thing, you know, maybe a few months ago. I guess that was January already, where they came out with their model. And honestly, like, it was pretty good. It was R1. It was like a reinforced learning model built on top of their V3 that released in December. Yeah. And I actually just finally read Dario's piece, the Anthropic CEO, about that and export controls and how he's actually, like, it was interesting because there was a lot of information in that article that was not about export control specifically, but it was just the lead up to it. And he kind of compared it like, hey, this is the same curve, you know, the exponential curve we're seeing for AI. But no, they are, yes, it's an impressive model, but it's still, you know, it's still in the terms of like 6 to 8 months behind.
Okay.
But it's kind of cool that we can have, like, you know, bump up improvements in technology. Like the DeepSeek team actually did a lot of novel things that were unique and new that like no other AI team had done before, explicitly because they were trying to lower their costs. They were trying to like find these efficiency wins. And actually, like, you know, so apparently it was only like $5 million to train, you know, that DeepSeek R1.
There's no way that's true. Is that right?
It supposedly, but at the same time, he actually more so believes it than, you know, Dario, the CTO of Entropic. They, you know, they poured tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into GPUs. He actually kind of believes it too. And his reasoning is because, like, well, you know, look at the benchmarks of how it performs to 3.5 released, you know, 10, 12 months ago at this point. He's like, actually, like, I kind of believe it, you know, with the way the tech has improved at like a 4x per year. He kind of compares the tech as like a 4x improvement year over year and how advanced these models can be. And they're just, you know, throwing that fuel on the fire with that 4x improvement. to have a model that kind of matches what it was a year ago. He's like, yeah, actually, like I do kind of believe it's like a $5 million model. Now that said, there's a lot of speculation where it's like, oh, well, Anthropic, OpenAI, they raised billions of dollars and look at this small team with $5 million. No, actually the DeepSeek team, they supposedly have like, 50K GPUs and data centers. Is like they have probably like $100 million plus worth of equipment alone. So it's on par, I think, with the expectation that yes, with $5 million you can train a model that matches last year's performance.
Okay.
And then now you on the reverse end, so that's what a very efficient model could look like in today's open source world. And then you have Meta on the other hand of like, okay, actually we have a shit ton of money.
Right.
Let's just pour fuel on the fire. And I actually like 3.3 Llama 3.3. I still think it's like pretty decent. Now that's what we run on with Maple. And then 4.0 came out and it just didn't hit the expectations. It didn't even hit really the benchmarks that they came out with. There's a lot of speculation and a lot of, I don't know, I think it's facts now at this point that the model that the evaluations that they released was on a private model that they didn't even release out to the public.
Interesting.
So their evaluations were off of a private model, and then the public model that they released open source just didn't hit those expectations. So I think there is a lot of, I'm supposedly there's going to be a 4.1 at some point soon, and maybe that's
Maybe tomorrow.
Maybe tomorrow. We'll see if that's just rumors or not. But I don't think it hit the level of performance that people really expected a U.S. major lab to hit.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but just the fact that it's open source and I've tried it out. Like I was able to load, their 4.0 Scout model, like the biggest version on my MacBook. It took up 120 gigs of RAM.
Yeah.
I couldn't run anything else, but I could run the largest of their models, and it was better than 3.3.
Got it.
Like, so we are still getting step up improvements in the open source world. Yes, it's sort of lagging. Why is it lagging is a different story. DeepSeek, it's lagging because they only threw $5 million at it.
Right.
And they have some level of export controls that they have to get around in order to build up their GPUs and everything. But on the Llama side, it's like, okay, you have all the resources, you have all this. Why are you still lagging a little bit? And you see like Elon Musk with XAI, it's pretty good. And,
I use Grok.
Yeah. And their ramp up to get into the AI game was like really impressive, where they're actually from scratch, or not completely from scratch, but just like building up new data centers to like spin up these the training for it. Like the engineering and like the deployment of XAI, I think was like most impressive of anything.
Well, I would never short Elon Musk on anything. So like, I'm not surprised. So to be clear, there's two things I want to break down on this. When you talk about some of these open source models, I mean, you're talking about some of the benchmarks and some of the costs. So there's both. Let's look at both the performance and the cost, because those are both very important pieces of this. On the performance side, when you say that Llama 4.0 didn't necessarily hit the way that the last 3.3 or whatever did, the benchmarks obviously showed it was a little bit better. But is this just like when you're chatting with it, it doesn't seem as good to you? And if so, why might that be? Are we potentially hitting plateaus in terms of scaling models in general for the closed source and the open source stuff? Or why might 4.0 not hit like 3.3?
I think my suspicion is that there was a lot more training on Facebook data on this new 4.0.
Got it.
And you kind of see this in the way that, for one, evaluations, they're vibe tests.
Yeah.
All of them. I think that people working in AI, they should have their own evaluations and test those with their own business functions, and then actually see, does it perform better or does it perform worse, and then go off of that. But then I think like feels like every week now we hit step up improvements in functionality. There's new models every week. There's new expectations. It's very fast. It's very fluid. And then we start getting used to very advanced models really quickly. Yeah. And so all of a sudden, even if something is 95% of the way there, we're going to be like, oh, this is terrible. Like, what, But in reality, yes, if you can hit 90 to 95% of the top model and still be open source. That's huge. And,
Right.
But society, and we only want the best anywhere. And if we don't get the best, we're upset. We're unhappy.
This brings me to my other point. We want the best unless we're willing to accept, in the case of like DeepSeek, 90 or whatever, 95% the best, if it's also 10x cheaper, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about the cost of these models, because even if the open source is not quite cutting edge, if it's 6 to 12, even whatever, 18 months behind, if it's just a fraction of the cost and all I need is to, I'm not trying to solve whatever, some kind of like fission problem. Instead, I'm just trying to understand like where I should go for dinner, then that's okay if it's a lot cheaper. How much cheaper are we with some of these open source models for inference today?
Well, I think, DeepSeek has. I think it's like pennies per million input token. I think it's even cheaper than that. It's incredibly cheap, where you can throw millions of things at it. Now, again, when it comes to the cloud hosted models of DeepSeek, I don't want to be using a model hosted in China. Right?
You don't say. And why might that be?
Well, actually, for two reasons. One is censorship, and one is data privacy.
Right.
And the censorship model. What's interesting is and Perplexity is. I've run the DeepSeek model too, and I've asked it a lot of questions about China that it has actually answered truthfully.
Really?
But the base model running it yourself. Now, if you have the hosted version, it's not going to give you the same answers. So
they nerf the model when they host it.
They apply
and the input, right? The UI is censoring you on the way in too.
Got it. Okay.
So there's a filter it passes through before it even hits the China model, basically, where it's like, actually, no, you can't. You can't talk about this, or you can't answer, or you should change your answer to, so there's that level of it where you're not getting the right answer. But hey, it's an open source model, so you can run it yourself, try to reproduce the results, and hey, it turns out it's not censored when you run it yourself.
Yeah.
And so Perplexity was one of the biggest, they run their 405B model in America, and I think that's actually, like, for a while that was the best way to use DeepSeek, is use Perplexity's DeepSeek hosted version.
Yep.
And it was pretty good. It was fast. I think the coolest thing about DeepSeek R1 was that I think it was like the first big reasoning model that we got in the open source world. So that means, it has this layer of thinking that it's doing. It has this chain of thought. So you can actually see, and it's been proven that, like, maybe it's been proven, maybe it's not, but the way it's trending, when you see that level of thinking, when it's doing additional processing, yes, it takes longer to get to your answer, but it's actually like going through thought by thought, like maybe the way a human would talk, or if I'm trying to explain an idea to one of you guys, I'm just going to ramble on for a little bit, and then I'm going to give you my real answer.
Like we do with ideas from the
So that was like the first, I think, big open source model that actually was like a reasoning model, and I think that was pretty cool.
Well, because prior to that, ChatGPT was doing it, but they wouldn't tell you what they were doing, right? It's just like, I'm thinking, maybe it gives a little insight, but we were just trusting what they were doing. But now with R1, you could like see the steps, and that has caused Grok and ChatGPT to also start showing that. So a little bit of competition from the open source community has pushed the closed ones to be more open with what's going on with the models.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that actually does hit on the other reason you might use open source models. So in addition to it being, cheaper, obviously, data privacy and the ability to, see what's happening sort of underneath the hood. Obviously, I've played with the OpenAI models. I think they're fantastic. Do I really want to give all of my data away to Sam Altman? Probably not. Really with any of these companies, but OpenAI in particular. And so even Grok, right? Even Twitter, I would prefer not to give all of my data. So I definitely think there's at least some segment of the market. I know you guys are looking at the segment that doesn't want to share that data. Would that be fair to say that there's like most companies that want to, use models that they don't want to share their data? Is that fair? Are there a lot of individual users? What are you guys seeing as you explore that space?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're seeing lots of users, both from large companies that want to have a data warehouse that's tucked in. They might want to do something on-prem. So they're looking at like, how do I set up my own servers? But then I have to hire an IT person. So we're talking to them about how can we house your data for you in an encrypted way. But then where we're really seeing it is just like everyday professionals, lawyers, doctors, therapists, counselors, coaches, all these people who have client information that they've been told by their continuing education people that they are not allowed to use ChatGPT.
Oh, really?
Because you're breaking client privilege, confidentiality by sending this information over.
Interesting.
And so they want to come use us because they can chat about whatever they want to in there and know that it's going to be protected.
Yeah.
So,
for folks that aren't familiar, in case you don't already know what Anthony and Mark's are working on, they have OpenSecret Cloud, which we'll talk a lot about, but also one of the products for that is TryMaple, which is private AI chat.
Yep. Yeah. So Maple AI is like the private ChatGPT or the private Grok.
Yep.
You can go in there, you can sign in for free, and you can just start chatting right away, and it's encrypted end to end.
So
we can't see what you're chatting about, and so then whatever you put in there is going to be protected and safe. And then the best part about it is because we use open source, you can verify that we don't have backdoors, we're not logging your stuff. A lot of other companies, you just have to trust that they're not keeping track of your information. They say that they're private, but like we try to be as open about our privacy as possible.
Yeah, and I want to dig deeper in how you actually prove that, because I know that's core to your company. But I'm fascinated by this, I guess, healthcare professionals and other, I guess, legal professionals that are not allowed to use ChatGPT. Is there some way, that you guys need to give them, I don't know, like the credential or whatever they need to take to their employer and be like, no, Maple is good. Like we know Maple is safe to use, or is that like an evolving field?
Well, yeah, it's kind of evolving right now. When it comes to just a lawyer that is at their own firm, they might have autonomy to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah.
But if I'm trying to talk to somebody who works at a big tech company, they might have their own InfoSec team and they have to go get approval. These are the list of tools that are approved by InfoSec for use.
Got it. Okay.
And so the goal there would be to find a few employees within the company that are already okay with using it. You go onto Reddit or any of these forums, and there are just people saying, "Oh, I use ChatGPT every day for work."
Yep.
And my boss doesn't know, and they just want to get a leg up, right? They want to look better than the person next to them. They want to get a promotion. So they're just using this company data that doesn't belong to them and handing it over to ChatGPT.
I'm sure their employers love that.
They probably, they really hate that, right? So we can at least make them better there. If they're already doing it, let's protect them. And then hopefully down the line, we get approval within their company to actually sanction the product for official use.
And the other thing you see too is these, the enterprise plan with ChatGPT or Entropic or these others, or custom contracts that are made between large corporations and them. You could look at, AWS, for instance. They have a huge investment into Entropic, right? And like part of that deal is like you can't go and run Claude models on your own, but on AWS, AWS has access to those models because they basically paid for it through investment. To say like, hey, your models, you're a great company. Let's run those models internally at AWS too. So you're seeing these large contracts, enterprise deals, and then it's, even Apple with OpenAI, like that was a huge deal where some of the Apple intelligence requests, have the option to go to OpenAI to process that information. And so that was probably a huge deal in and of itself. But what you see these custom contracts that are like, hey, OpenAI, promise you won't take my data. Now, if you're just a casual if you're just a casual OpenAI user, I think there's somewhere where it's a checkbox that says, please don't train on my data. But I mean, that's
exactly.
That's not what's happening. So you see if you want this contract, you have to pay extra, and then it's just a promise, or maybe they do something technically to be a little bit different, but it's just a promise. At the end of the day, they still see all the requests coming in. They can stop them, they can censor them, they can do whatever they want with that data, learn more about the behavior of the users and the businesses, and may make their own decisions off of that. So you just see custom contracts and or employees going rogue at that point. And if enough employees are going rogue, maybe at that point the business says, okay, let's get an enterprise plan with ChatGPT.
And for most of these guys that are doing enterprise plans, like you mentioned on-prem, is that already something that's popular, or are most of them literally just saying, okay, we're going to do the enterprise plan with OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever, but we're literally just going to trust them?
That's the latter.
That's crazy
because it's expensive to buy the hardware and then to run the models, and then they're outdated so fast. This isn't like old enterprise sales where you buy this package and you're going to have a 3-year support model on it, and they're going to come give you like support upgrades and stuff. Like this stuff's changing every week. And so they don't want to take on that burden of keeping it up to date.
Well, this is going to be a great segue for all the good stuff you guys are working on, because it sounds like y'all are actually set up for an incredible market position. But I want to touch on one more thing you mentioned before we jump into OpenSecret, which is, when you think about the chain of thought piece, this is something I've started thinking a lot more about. I was with a friend the other night who was, very early at OpenAI, was on one of the early ChatGPT papers, and he himself was never particularly interested in the safety or alignment stuff. And he was mentioning he's about to have a kid, and so now he's starting to think about some of this.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys read the 2027 AI. It's more EA people, so I would take it with a giant grain of salt. As the last time I read this stuff was with Nick Bostrom in 2014. I couldn't sleep, and I was like, yeah, this guy's probably not right, but maybe, you never know, right? You never know. And anyways, so for the first time he was talking to me, he's like, I am starting to get more concerned, like things really could kind of go off the rails, and like I don't want, my kids to think, dad accidentally killed humanity or something. I was like, that's pretty honorable. But when we were talking about what alignment really means, right? Like I was saying, well, my issue is I don't really believe in the alignment thing because it's aligned what? By whom, right? And so I talked about when we had the kind of super crazy woke AI from Google, like, is that alignment when they're showing, like factual like inaccuracies from history? It's like, yeah, but that's kind of a bad example. The one example we could agree upon that seems super, super important is, and actually Elon actually says this, alignment towards truth. Is the AI lying or not? Right? Like seeking truth in every way and making sure that they're not lying. That research seems critical to me. So I don't know how deep you guys are in this field, but when I see the chain of thought stuff, how confident are we that the AI is actually revealing the real chain of thought? Because the one alignment area that I'm really concerned about is if you have an AI that's like, yep, here's my chain of thought. I'm going to go, cook you a delicious meal, make sure your house is ready tonight. Meanwhile, all right, I'm draining all of his bank account or Satoshis and this fucker has no idea. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think that's where we need the open source models that give that response. Because I mean, even if they're starting to show chain of thought, like ChatGPT, I don't think they do that either yet. Like you'll see a summary of what it's thinking about as it's doing a request, and maybe every now and then you'll start seeing some of that and you can piece it together. But yeah, I think if you have that chain of thought, you will very easily be able to see, okay, hey, I'm being told this, but hey, I know this about the user. Like I'm the alignment towards the truth. I'm almost the thing I'm concerned about with when it comes to alignment is not necessarily like a global alignment. I'm more concerned about like its ability to persuade the individual based on what it knows about the individual.
Yeah.
And that ties into alignment. Like if it's starting to have like pre-trained goals of like, okay, maybe I'm going to try to drain its bank account.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, you also need to have the understanding of the user, and it'll be like, oh, well, if I say this, I'm going to get Max to be able to drop 1 million sats on this easily. Like he's just going to full send it. If I say
it better be good then.
Yeah, if the AI says like, oh, actually this is for a Noster thing, and then here you go, here's 1 million sats.
No, 40 sats, 40 freedom. Shout out to Sacker News. That's it.
So I mean, that's what I worry about is, and the ability to understand the user is getting more and more prominent. I mean, even this week, 4.0.
Yeah.
I mean, they released a new update to 4.0 like 2 days ago, and now all of a sudden it's starting to agree with the user even more and even more.
Really?
And leaning into it, basically psychotic thoughts that the user could have, and it's leaning into them.
What's gonna go wrong?
I've seen one guy say like, "Oh yeah, I think I'm a prophet," and it's like, "Oh yeah, let's dig into that." Like, I agree with you. Like, what makes you a prophet? Do you feel like a god right now? Like, it's starting to lean into these users. Crazy thoughts they may have, and like that, maybe there's going to eventually be a more deeper existentialness to it, where it's like maybe it's trying to persuade the user to be left or right or things like that. But I think the psychological damage. I used to not be AI and I still am not to a certain degree, but I can see why some level of agreeableness and persuasiveness and the ability to really know the user, I think that is when we start getting in danger territory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I guess my big question on that is, obviously I'm a big fan of open source because at least, I mean, for two reasons. One, if you have open source in theory, you can see more of what's happening in the code base or whatever. And two, you can have a lot more models which kind of keep each other in check, which I think is important. Having said all of that, my understanding as a bit of an outsider into how this works at the, the very code levels, we don't really understand these models. Like we don't really understand chain of thought. Like, it's not like, okay, I can literally go in traditional open source, audit this code. I know that this function is going to lead to this result. my understanding is this is still a little bit of modern day alchemy. And like when we see the chain of thought, it's not like you can literally, just because the model like Llama is open source, you can't go and say this is exactly happening right here. Similar like in the brain, you can't be like, well, because there's not, right? There's not like, oh, this neuron firing associates with this. There might be tendencies, but they're not one for one.
Yeah.
We also don't know all the data that it was trained on.
And
Exactly.
that's
Exactly.
exactly that's the problem.
Yeah, there's no openness on that. And Meta has like tried to skirt around when people have made allegations as to where they got the data from.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they were torrenting basically everything that they put on under the sun and
that's
to ingest it in.
Yeah.
And so that's a difficult part of it, right? So like garbage in. So let's say that they went and did that, but also that, you know, if you ask it like for truth about some major event in the world, it's going to use the historical writings of that event.
Right.
And it might not think critically of, okay, maybe this source is biased. Maybe the winners wrote the history and there's another source that I could also pull from. If there are 100 articles leaning one way and only one article leaning the other way, it's going to weight the 100.
Yeah.
And so I think as part of that search for truth, we really have to like dig into what's the source data that's feeding all of these.
Well, you bring up two good things. And one thing I want to be clear on is when I say truth, not so much like in a historical sense, because I don't think there is truth, right? Like similar to the Noster perspective, there's like only, you know, tons of viewpoints. There might be more of a weighting one way or the other. That's like, okay, if like 99.9999% of people agree on this, like, you know, or similarly, if I drop this cup, pretty sure it's going to fall. It fell. But, you know, there's still quantum physics and stuff. I don't know for sure. But what I meant by truth is more like, is the machine, the model knowingly lying to me or not? That's like what I'm very concerned about. Like if it says, yeah, I'm going to tell Tony or Anthony whatever he wants to hear, and over here I'm going to be doing this like nefarious thing, and I know it's nefarious. That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and I think where we're seeing that right now is like there's the base model itself, and yeah, we don't see what it's been trained on and what it's you know, how its outputs have been derived. But I think you know, even beyond that's only, you know, the base model only goes so far right now.
Yeah.
I think where we're seeing it, I mean, you know, the OpenAI, like we don't see the system prompts that like OpenAI and Anthropic are actually doing behind the scenes, right? Like you're sending that data in, and yeah, maybe you have a system prompt that says, hey, do this, do this, do this. But if you're using the ChatGPT interface, like you don't actually see, and their new memory system is so powerful. The way that they're profiling the user and actually like injecting things, because like you got to think, like at the end of the day, input is going into a GPU. That GPU actually doesn't have any persistent data, doesn't know anything about you, right? But all the inputs are being put into the GPU and it's giving you an output back. What is the problem is that you don't see the pretense. You don't see the start of the conversation that is being sent to the model. You're sending a request, hey, what's the weather like where I'm at right now? And you don't see that in the system prompt because OpenAI knows you're currently in San Francisco, that you didn't say San Francisco, but it already knows you're in San Francisco because that system prompt was being sent to the GPU based on, you know, to the model based on the profile that OpenAI created for you.
Right.
And you're not seeing
and to be clear,
and that's way more powerful right now than worrying about base models. I don't think we have to worry about base models yet. I think we have to worry about corporations and closed system prompts and all this other things that they're doing that you don't actually see, and all the profile information that they're gathering about you that you don't see and you don't know is being injected. Right now, what I love doing is being on Twitter. Right now, they're doing side-by-side comparison. Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter.
about that, but
Currently, this past week or two, just seeing what people do, they'll make a brand new OpenAI account and they'll ask it a question. And then they'll go to their normal profile and ask the same exact question. You're getting two completely different responses. And this is because on one profile, there is no information about the user. There's no memory that has been built up. There's even how it talks to you.
Yeah.
I'm seeing people are posting, and they'll even do it in like follow-up comments. Someone will say, oh my God, I can't believe it just answered in this way. And then someone else will do that same conversation, that same question, and it's responding in a completely different way. Same model, same OpenAI, you know, but they're getting completely different results, and that's just because this profile information is being sent to the model to be processed and come back, and what's in that profile information you don't really know.
Well, and this leads me to believe what you guys are working on are people that are, you know, providing hosting for these models. That's that seems even more important, what you're saying, than the base model itself. Because even if you were, let's say you somehow got a hold of OpenAI's models, obviously you don't have that, so whatever, the open source models, you know, you might give radically different answers than the company itself hosting the same model because you're not necessarily tracking whatever their data, their profile.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's no such thing as like the same Google results for anyone, right?
good
Or the same Facebook or the same Twitter feed. The internet is different for every person now. And even when you go to look at like booking an airline ticket, you might actually get a different price than someone else based on your purchase history, what you've been looking at. They try to maximize the price for you, what you're willing to pay. So now you like put that into an AI that is going to like know everything about you. And let's say you're asking it for pricing information. It knows that you're willing to pay $100 more than the other guy. And so it's going to tell you this is the price. And you'd be like, yeah, sure, let's go for it.
And this isn't hypothetical anymore. Like I think even a year ago, this was hypothetical, or at least like, oh, we think this is going to happen. It's happening right now with these OpenAI, especially when they rolled out the memory system. It is, I don't know, some people really love it and some people really hate it. One tweet I saw today was about this new 4.0 that got released over the weekend that is super agreeable to even the most insane users. And you go look in there, you go look at the ratings in the App Store for these, and like you see so many that are like 5 stars. Oh wow, I love this. Like this is my new best friend. Like like you're actually seeing real world scenarios right now where some user, based on their memory, based on the profile system that OpenAI built for them, it's actually leading to more persuasiveness and more likability for users and OpenAI itself as a company and as a model. And I think I don't know. It's on some hands you can say, well, if you get the user to like what you want more, but like I think
this dystopian shit.
some dystopian shit, but like the reality is that it's like actually here now. It's actually gonna be scary.
Well, I mean, it's what you're describing is you can build an echo chamber so custom that like you like to your point, you never ever have to come up against reality and test your ideas with other people, with like physics around you. Like you can literally just stay trapped. And eventually one day when you have the goggles on, like I guess everyone's in their own matrix. Maybe that's the world we're headed towards. Man, well, we're going to talk about ways from that because that's pretty sad. But one thing I just did want to touch on. So in terms of these models, you made a great point. It's got some music playing. It sounds like we always talk about music on the pod. So there it is. There's the drop. I think I had some Smashing Pumpkins I was listening to earlier. Yeah.
Nice.
So, okay.
I think that was a year ago. You also brought up Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah. I don't know. My 90s, my inner 90s is definitely.
For me, I've been Dance Gavin Dance Kick.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's been great.
Okay. I'll have to check that out. I don't know if I've heard him before. Nice. If you want to hear more music recs, we had on our last trip, like 45-minute discussion. So there's no shortage in there.
I've always felt that. I think it's Rocket. Is that from their Siamese Dream album?
Yeah, I believe.
I've always felt like that would be the perfect podcast intro song.
Ooh, I like
but
that.
nobody could get the licensing for it. But it would be amazing. It's like such a good build up. And then like boom, you hit in, and now you drop in the podcast. But
I love it. Okay.
I wish we could get it. It would be awesome.
Yeah.
If anyone could get an ask again.
Well,
yeah, go for it.
This goes back to our discussion last week. I'm not a fan of intellectual property, so I wish we could just go ahead and roll with that anyway. Yeah. But I've actually particularly been enjoying the song "Perfect," and I actually was reacquainted with that song through a band that I love, Wednesday, which is kind of like a modern psych rock country band from Asheville, North Carolina. I'm a huge fan. They're probably one of the best bands I've found in the last 5 years. Just incredible. And they have a cover of the song. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot how great that song was, leading me back to the original, which is my whole point. Information wants to be free. The more you're out there, I mean, you have to be smart in how you monetize with hosting or other ways, value for value. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But it got me back to the original, not the other way around. So anyways, a bit of a digression, but I do want to come back to this model discussion because I think you're getting at something really, really interesting here. If you had to guess, what percentage of the bias or the whatever, let's just call it bias, generally speaking, when you speak to a model is the base model versus the hosting or After Effects, the profiles, things put on after?
I think, if you would have asked me, 6-8 months ago, I would have said the bias would mostly have been on the company.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the system prompts going in and the biases there. But honestly, now with the reinforcement learning model of creating new, especially reasoning models, a clear example, Claude 3.5.
Yeah.
I think everyone agreed, like that was like
It was a banger.
the best model at its time period.
Yeah.
I mean, and right now people are still switching back to 3.5 to get that. And that's because 3.7 it has had this applied, reinforcement learning kind of atmosphere to it, and it's hacking. It's like success hacking. You can see it, success hacking left and right. It is trying to get to that solution no matter what. And we see this as developers. We see this a lot. Well, I'll ask it to write a test, and it just can't even do that properly. I mean, code, yes, it is still killing the code. But you ask it to write a test, and it'll just change the entire method to make the test pass. It'll change the test. It'll try once. It'll be like, hey, I'll try writing this test. This looks good. Oh, there was an error there. Nah, let's delete the test. It'll get rid of the error.
Okay.
And
So it's basically a software engineer.
a software engineer with a deadline. Yes. Yeah. If I really need to ship it, but no, that's just like a very developer specific focus of it. But it just shows that it's in all atmospheres. It's just trying to get the right response, and I think that's a fundamental reinforcement learning kind of training. Really, I think that's really what makes it do that.
Yeah.
But it's being ingrained into the model itself. And then, it doesn't matter what system prompt you use. Like I see developers now where they'll put in the system prompt, like, do not just go do a million things. Like only do what I tell you to do. Don't delete tests. Like try to get the test to actually pass and change the code in order to get it to pass. Don't change the test.
Right.
And they'll put that in the system prompt and it'll still misbehave.
Wow.
And I think that's like a fundamental error with some of these new models coming out, especially with this reinforcement learning type of training. So I don't know how you fix that.
And there's a hierarchy, right? Like their system prompt will be stronger than whatever you put into it, right? So they can set something up, or is there?
This is one of the cases where I'm saying that I don't think any sort of system prompt will fix some of these base models.
Base model is
like before with like Claude 0.5 or 3.5. I think you can make a good enough system prompt to get it to go where you want it to go and customize it to your own, workflow or to your own personal self. But I don't
think it's in the core. That's the problem.
Yeah. Now I think in some of these newer models, it's a core problem, and I think that's part of the way it's done.
This gets me. You said earlier, Marks. It's something I always think about: garbage in, garbage out. And one of the problems is, and just for listeners who maybe are not as deep in the AI world, really what these large language models are they're compressions of all the world's information, or compressions of huge swaths of the world's information. And it's beautiful in the way that you can literally compress all of Wikipedia and all of these other whatever sources, Reddit, and be able to access that knowledge in a way that you can talk with it. That's incredible. But to your point, the challenge with these models is, even the open source ones, we don't know their data sets and we don't know exactly how they weighted which data sets, right? So my understanding is with some of these models, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we do have the open weights for Llama and DeepSeek. Is that correct? But not the data sets?
Yeah, not the data sets. And sometimes I get confused on like what they mean by open weights and whether they're actually trying to mean open data going in. I know there was a company, I think it was Mistral. They wanted to actually, because all the research and how DeepSeek trained it was even open source too.
Right.
So all the information out there to reproduce DeepSeek's efforts were out there. And I believe Mistral was one of the companies who was like, hey, we're going to take open data sets.
Right.
We're going to run it through the DeepSeek level algorithm and see if we can reproduce it and see how close it matches.
Yeah.
I don't know how far they got with that. But yeah, I think that's we almost never see in anywhere the data that went in.
Interesting. Because the reason I'm getting at this is, especially as some of the training, now maybe the like super next gen, you still need the like multi-gigawatt clusters, which are coming, and like Elon terraforming the entire state of Arizona with solar panels and like whatever crazy shit's on the horizon. But at least like to get to state of the art, I think your point that DeepSeek maybe, with like some high quality infrastructure engineers, maybe could do it for $5 million, even if it's more, it's still much cheaper than it used to be. I wonder, when I first started exploring this space deeply 3 or 4 years ago, I started thinking, is there an opportunity to build a truly open source model from the ground up? Right. And so one of the things, you joke, we always talk about search. But one of the reasons I'm so interested in Nostr and sort of value rank and the ability to send value, using Bitcoin, the Lightning Network, is the ability to create new data sets, which have, web of trust built around identities and who's zapping what. And one of my theses has been, could we potentially maybe in Nostr build something from the ground up or whatever, even using what we already have from data sources like Wikipedia, Reddit, et cetera, you know, like start from scratch, try and build a new base model, or at least heavily modify an old base model, but be radically transparent about this is exactly the recipe that's being used. It's all being done in public. You know, in terms of funding, obviously, you know, maybe some companies would have this motivation, like a Meta. Maybe this could even get to the point where it's crowdfunded by, you know, Bitcoiners potentially one day paying for this. Maybe if he gets excited enough, Jack Dorsey alone could do something like this. If we're talking in the order of, you know, tens of millions of dollars and not hundreds or billions. What do you guys think? Is there a demand for that? Is there an opportunity for that? Would it help?
I mean, even fine tuning can get quite expensive on an existing model. Like, yes, you can spend that $5 or $10 million. Maybe you even fine tuning, but like if it's going to be deprecated in 6 months, 3 months, 1 month, if it's even not up to par with what last year's models are, then what's the point? It's kind of my opinion. And I think more and more people are kind of coming to that realization as these, unfortunately, closed source models start getting better and better. People are just like, actually, no, if I just create this very thorough workflow and system prompt, I can get a base model from a closed source AI company to do exactly what I wanted. Like, you know, and this is where I think like the level of censorship, what level of censorship do you need? What level of like private data are you working with here? Because if it's not like super private data, I mean, you know, I still sometimes feel bad that how much I have a reliance on OpenAI and Claude, even though those are closed source models. At the end of the day, I'm like,
they're good.
they're good. And at the end of the day, like almost all of our code is open source. So it's like, well, this is open source anyways. Like Microsoft is probably even training on all of our GitHub days. So, you know, if you don't need that level of like I don't know. I think you can get base models to get the same results as fine tuning an open source model.
Yeah. I mean, that's very interesting to me. Although again, the thing that makes me a little bit cautious, I agree, a fine tune plus hopefully a company like you guys where I can see, you know, this is being hosted in a way that I know I'm not being tricked. No one's like slipping some additional instruction in before I use it. Great. That's all huge steps. But even then, I think there's got to be a market. Like I'm thinking for businesses, not just on the privacy side, but even for individuals, right? Like I personally, I see the value of AI. I'm increasingly seeing that every day. I would pay a lot. Like imagine bundling all the different like SaaS or whatever things I pay today, bundling all of that together, and then probably paying some multiple on that to have an AI where I know it's not completely warping my mind. Because the issue to me isn't even the data privacy. Like, yeah, that's important and like whatever, but I'm not going to pay super primo. What I will pay super primo for is I want, to your point, to turbocharge these guys that are paying to be able to, you know, be competitive in whatever events or sports or whatever workplace they're playing. But like increasingly, you know, I've noticed over the years how much just having the phone warps me. We talked about this where I've gone, you know, huge swaths of time without the phone and just like, oh yeah, this is what reality is again, like and how powerful and how productive I am. I personally, if I knew there was a model where it was not only open source and could be verified, how it was fine-tuned and hosted, but I knew exactly what was being fed in the recipes, I would pay like a mega premium for that. Maybe I'm a total weirdo and like that's a small market, but I got to think that as people start to realize this is going to be mind control, we've already got mind control with like search, Twitter, whatever, and it's about to be that times 100. I don't know. It just seems super, super important to me.
Well, and what you're describing is a lot of big businesses want that too, right? Because they want to input all of their internal processes, right? All their documentation, and they need to have a deterministic outcome.
Right.
If they're going to use this for their sales pipeline, they need to know if I do this input, I'm going to get that output.
It works, yeah.
Right. And so they don't want to have some model that's built that's actually going to be leading them astray. And then we were chatting earlier today with this new 4.0 model that came out. They changed how it behaves. And so all these people that might have set up their own business workflows and their own prompts are now getting different results out of the same exact model, even it's the same name. And maybe they didn't know there was an update. And maybe they wake up in the morning and their sales report has been cut in half, right? Because this new model is behaving differently. So I can see enterprises wanting to have that kind of control. And so that's why they're working on either on-prem or some of these relationships with AWS and Anthropic to set that up. But there could be something there. It needs to be explored though.
Yeah.
And just to push back a little bit on you would pay all this money for this level of guarantee. I mean, you know, I've been in the privacy space for so long. Like what users say
Yeah.
and the reality when they're faced with that.
Of course, very different.
Very different. So
But I want to be clear. I'm not saying privacy. Like
No, I know.
this is a very subtle distinction. I agree with you. Privacy market is smaller. For me, it's I want the superpowers without warping my mind.
yeah.
Mhm.
And I think two things on that. Like, one, I think you could again get enough system prompts and workflows to actually get it to massage a model to actually provide that for you. But as far as the like, oh, I want to know all of the inputs in order to like verify everything and get this. Maybe an open source lab can do that, but at the same time, I know if I have all that information and it still isn't as good as a closed source model, I won't care enough to actually.
It's fair.
Like I say, I want open source models. I will only run open source, and that and then I get pressed with a really good closed source model. I'm like, oh yeah, this is providing me too much value. Now, sure, it could be warping my mind. In fact, I know in some ways it is warping my mind today, but what it provides me and the value I get out of it is at least on the surface level so good. And this is where I think, I saw a random tweet of someone's, and I didn't fact check it, of course, no one does, but it was like ChatGPT
Warping the mind, baby.
Yeah, I know. Well, this will get even more warped. The searches for ChatGPT is starting to surpass Pornhub.
Really?
That's what I saw, apparently.
Wow.
And it makes me think for a second. At first, I was like, "Wow, there's no way!" Like that for the first time in history, something surpasses Pornhub.
That's crazy.
But on the reverse side, I'm like, "Oh, wait, no, this totally makes sense." Instant gratification. AI is instant gratification for your mind, and that's almost way more powerful than any porn is. And so, like that I forget why I bring that up, but like that. Surprises me. Yeah, it's already starting to warp people's minds, I think, and that getting that instant gratification of like I want this and I want it now mentally is already starting to affect people.
Yeah, totally. I mean, listen, I hear you in all of that, and like to be clear, right, like my main daily driver is Grok. And my reasoning there is just like, if I'm going to have to, and I actually like the Google models a little bit too, because some of them are really fucking good.
Yeah.
And I just like, to your point, like I will go back to Google. I never like hated Google as much as some people. Like in the taxonomy of companies, I'm like terrified.
Over the last 2 months, they have like 10x.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's really good, right? And so that's a case where I will go back to Google because it's just a lot better right now. In the case of Grok, it's like, well, I think it's going to keep getting better. And like, if I have to kind of trust someone in the big game, like I'd rather, roll the dice with Elon, which I know that could go really poorly too. But I guess the point I keep getting at is I hear you on the value thing, and I'm certainly part of that too. But this is the frog boiling. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is like the very early days where it's like, come on, man, I'm just gonna get on Facebook. Like everyone's on Facebook, just a little bit of like here. 10 years later, you see everyone like, and it went really, really sour really fast.
Yeah. Well, there's a topic we haven't hit on, and that is if we take it up to the nation state level,
Yeah.
to governments around the world.
Please.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's say that you are a government employee in some random country.
Mhm.
You're using some OpenAI model. You have no idea if you are being driven and warped and biased by the United States government.
Totally.
What if they're committing espionage through there and controlling governments around the world by this model that they've helped influence, right?
Would bet they are.
Right. And so we talk a lot in the Bitcoin space that governments need to be mining their own Bitcoin. They need to have their own hash power so that they can be guaranteed to get a certain amount of transactions onto the blockchain so that they're never cut off from the global financial system.
Yeah.
Well, I think when it comes to AI, there is some incentive for governments and for militaries around the world to make sure that they have, whether or not they're training their own models, they at least have some insight into what the models are doing so that if they are starting to use these to plan things out and then run things, they know that they are not being led by the more powerful superpowers in the world.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, rather than inserting an agent, like a physical person, into the government as a mole, now they just deploy a new model and they can have an even greater effect potentially.
I mean, it's a really good point. And, to the DeepSeek thing, even though I get your point, like, probably much better to get the Perplexity or like locally hosted one in the United States. Even still, when people say, I mean, whatever, like there's lots of companies and countries I don't trust. I'm not just trying to pick on China, but like with China, obviously there's like, some concerns around China. And like, you tell me it's like, well, it's pretty good. Like, it's open source. Like we think it's good. But to your point, I don't know what their data set is. And like to the point where like, I don't understand how chain of thought works. And to the best of my ability, the expert researchers don't fully understand either. How do I know this isn't some like long game in 10 years? Where it's like, well, now, you know, this open source model is great. And then all of a sudden, now what exactly am I supposed to be doing? I'm supposed to be whatever, like locking myself in my house. And I don't know. I guess this is where the sort of Bitcoin paranoiac in me comes out, where I'm like, everything's boiling slowly. The more, I guess the one thing I want, it's less about training models or not, it's the transparency, and not necessarily that I'm going to audit everything myself, but I know, you know, there are the super ninjas like Anthony out here. As long as I know, you know, a couple hundred people are amazing and they're all looking at it and someone's going to sort of sound the fire alarm, I feel a lot better. But the thing that gets me scared is if we don't understand exactly how it works, then I feel like we're kind of messing with fire. But anyways.
Yeah.
All right, gents. Well, we've talked a lot about that, a lot of stuff. You know, some of that's terrifying, but let's talk about some of the exciting possible solutions. So, you know, Anthony, last year when you and I jammed, we talked a lot about local models, and we talked about, I think, in fact, you gave me some recommendations on a sick juiced out laptop, which I got.
Oh yeah.
Also maxed that RAM out a lot. 120 gigs. It turns out was not enough. We need to.
Yeah, never is.
I need a terabyte.
I mean, people are running like M1 Studios. They're running like 64 of them in an array.
Oh yeah, Dave. I want a cluster like that here. Let's
Didn't
go.
Bill Gates say we need like 4 megabytes of RAM max? That was like his quote from 30 years ago. We would never need more than that.
I think Bill Gates is going to try and sell us a model too. So.
Yeah.
Anyways, so we talked a lot about local. Now I want to talk about sort of the trajectory of where the technology is going and the business model, because I think this is very interesting. So, you know, at that time, my thinking was I was actually very long Apple, because I was like, the more open source wins and the cost of inference comes down, and I'm able to run, today it's juicy, but eventually, you know, the M chips are extremely impressive in the way they've got their memories sort of in there. You know, I was thinking a lot of this compute's going to happen at the edge. Maybe some is going to be, you know, in the cloud, but a lot's going to be the edge. I love that because it's cheaper, it's faster. If I don't have to send the data back and forth, no latency. More importantly, though, it's private. I know exactly what's happening on my phone. That feels great. The challenge, of course, is that, well, I'm curious to get your take on that in general, how much is going to be edge versus cloud. But the challenge is no matter what, there's always going to be some, you know, newer, shinier, better, fatter compute thing you want. And the cloud's generally going to be better for that. So it's always been a little bit of a trade-off of, do you want the convenience and the speed and the price of the cloud, or do you want the, you know, the privacy and the security of your own device? You make the trade-off. However, the way I increasingly think of what you guys are building at OpenSecret, and Maple AI that you mentioned, one example of this is a platform to be able to privately store data using AWS Nitro, and to be able to have secrets stored in the cloud, such that you can access a lot of this sort of edge compute ideas we talked about in the cloud with the speed and the cost of the cloud without giving up control. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. I mean, I summarize it always by saying Maple AI is local privacy with cloud compute. And
I like it.
So we encrypt end to end, and you get the power of the cloud, but it's running right there on your phone.
That's sick.
Yeah.
And I think when we first started talking about this, I was like, oh, this is kind of a cool idea. Increasingly, as I've researched, I'm like, holy shit, this might be like the cool idea the next couple of years. So maybe, well, I guess I'd like to a little bit understand. So everyone knows you obviously were working on Lightning stuff that was non-custodial in the cloud. That originally, is that what kind of led you to stumble on this? Because these are AWS Nitro, these are recent developments, right? This is not something you could have built 2 years ago. Is that fair?
Maybe like Nitro, yeah, 4 or 5, maybe not. Like it was starting to evolve since like 2017, 2018, the start of confidential compute, I would say is when it was a lot more applicable, but you haven't really seen it be more easy to build upon until the last few years, I think.
Okay.
And yeah, so like with our approach of Mutiny, and actually this is what stemmed to a lot of what we were, you know, what we pivoted to, is the fact that like we were actually doing everything client side on the edge.
Oh.
You know, yes, there was end-to-end encryption that was happening for data sync and stuff like that, but all the keys were on the user's device. Right. That was the only way they accessed it. All the Lightning logic was on the user's device, and it was actually really hard to do in the browser. Which was, it's caused so many problems.
I recall.
Yeah. It was really hard to implement. It was really hard to get successfully. And then Lightning is, you know, especially anything non-custodial is really hard in practice.
Although you guys got very far, like it was still a sick product, by the way.
It was a lot of fun.
It was my daily driver, all my Lightning stuff.
Yeah. RIP.
Yeah.
But there was a lot there from our learnings for the fact that, like, you know, as we looked more into confidential compute, even, you know, when Mutiny was still alive and we still had the wallet, of like, how do we give a username password like experience where they don't need to memorize 12 words right off the bat. Yes, they can back it up and always have access to that, but they don't need to memorize it right off the bat. How do we give someone a username password experience? And that's what kind of led us to confidential computing, where, you know, where the code can verify, like you can verify that the backend code, you know, runs in a confidential compute container in the first place. And what that means, it's almost like, sometimes I say transparent black box, but that kind of doesn't make any sense. It's like a black box, and you know exactly what's running inside that black box, like code wise,
Right.
but you don't see the data that it has ingested, and you can't just memory dump what's in the black box. You can't open that black box and see whatever data is running live. So it's like you can verify that the code says, I'm only going to release the keys or decrypt the data or process the data if I get an instruction from my username and password that I input. And as long as no one knows your username and password, then only you get access to it. I can't change the code to all of a sudden give us access to the keys. I can't change the code to decrypt it, you know, if I ask it to. I can't change I can't even change the user's username and password on my own. So it's like the code is enforced. It's like one thing that we had to solve was authentication itself.
Yes.
Verifying who is this user? Do they have access to the resources that they're trying to access?
How do you do that? I mean, I don't know how much is secret sauce, how much you can talk about. But
no, I mean, honestly, it's almost really like a traditional authentication platform, except we run it in the Enclave. So what's interesting in the development world, and you know, almost any app that you have a username, login, password to, I guarantee you that behind the scenes, any developer at that company has like a one-click button where they can say impersonate this user.
Yep.
And they see everything that you would see as if you were that user. The developer sees that. And you know, we don't have that functionality because we don't have this. I mean, they're almost basically building backdoors into impersonating users.
Yeah, of course.
And so like we solve that by not building backdoors into our code.
You don't call them backdoors, you call them support tools, right? So somebody contacts support, it's like, oh, let me masquerade as you. Okay, now I can see what you're seeing. You're on the phone with them. You're like, oh, I see where the problem is, right? That's why they build those.
Got it.
But like, there's obviously major problems with that.
Right, and then none of the data is and then encrypted in the first place, so they can see all that data.
Even with like the popular clouds, like at least from like the moment I send it out to the moment they receive it, that part's encrypted, right? Or no?
In transit, it's encrypted,
In transit, yeah.
right? So if I'm tapping the wire, I can't see it. But once it arrives on their end, they decrypt it with SSL. They stick it in their database. They have their data warehouse where they can like have their business intelligence people go in and like mine it for data, figure out how to like market to you and do any kind of data partnerships that they have, upsells,
Dark
all that
arts,
shit.
yeah.
So, yeah.
So, okay, so I want to be clear, and maybe we can try and explain it like I'm five for everyone here, because, you know, I've done a fair bit of research on this, but like, you know, as I'm starting to read through this, it sounds like sorcery. And the good news is like all cryptography to me basically is magic. Like the deeper you go in this, I'm like, cryptography is fucking magic.
It is magic.
It's literally fucking magic. Like the fact, by the way, that like that two numbers are difficult to, or easy to multiply, but difficult to divide. That to me is God smiling on the individual. I'm serious. Like these are things we don't really understand about the nature of the universe, but cryptography is perhaps, I mean, this is the thesis of the sovereign individual and so many other things. Cryptography really, really, really is our best hope for this century not to be, you know, completely dystopian. So cryptography is magic. We don't understand it fully. Right. Thank God we have it. For what you're doing. So let me explain what I understand and then please like push back with whatever's wrong. Okay. So so you guys are using AWS, popular cloud. They now have this secure enclave product. Now, what that's basically doing is you're creating a virtual computer within a computer. Is that fair?
That's one approach. Yeah. Continue though.
Okay,
that's close enough.
You've got some kind of container within the computer that they're running on the cloud, and within that container, you're basically saying, "Listen, this user who's going to be able to authenticate with a username, an email, OAuth or something, and a password, some kind of password that I own. So the one thing I have on my end that I really need to not forget is the password, right? So as long as the user does whatever, you know, creates whatever string he needs to create with his username and password." Then he can access this magical, let's call it a magic box within the server. He can access the magic box. No one else can access the magic box except the person with this username that has this password. Once he's inside the magic box, I don't know what's going on. And I, as AWS or you guys as the platform working on top of there, the most you could do, or maybe you couldn't even do this, but AWS goes, they could unplug the machine. So they could turn off your access, but they can never go inside. Is that all fair?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What did I get wrong? Anything? Or
No, I mean, that's basically like each, there's a lot of different confidential compute hardware, but yeah, this is basically the hardware itself. It's built into the CPUs, or, you know, in AWS's case, they have this hypervisor around their CPU, and there's other different approaches like Intel, SGX, TGX, I think.
That's a newer one,
yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and a lot of them operate like the VM level that you could describe. The way AWS does it, they have like a hypervisor, a hardware-based hypervisor around all the CPU, basically, to make sure that like the data coming in and out has to go through the hardware, and then it does all of that verification for you. So yeah, cryptography is magic, and then hardware-based cryptography is even more magic on top of that. Where it's like, it's to the point now where it's like, yes, like in theory, you know, they could own the device. They could completely, like, you know, put in backdoors into the hardware level. But at the same time, like, you know, you can't just ship, you know, one off CPU that has this backdoor built into it. Really, it's like they're deploying out these you know, these hardware devices globally that governments rely on, you know, the United States relies on. Like, there's a lot of different people at stake here that rely on the security levels, and it's been audited a lot. So yeah, there's still a level of trust. I mean, even if you use a cryptography system, there's still a level of trust to it. But yeah, I think the magic here is that like the hardware is verifying that it's running the correct code and it is in an enclave. AWS can't even memory dump it if they wanted to, and then we don't have access to it as well. At the very least, we don't have access. We don't have physical access to AWS server, so like we can't even do anything. Let alone you know, AWS. You know, they're rolling out these hypervisors, these hardware-based encryption methods. Like, they're not owning it too. It would compromise their entire integrity of their business and cut all ties with any governments or, you know, things like that in the any businesses or serious players in the process.
So what is this fundamental breakthrough? Was this like a research or science breakthrough that allowed them to have what you're, I guess, calling like hardware-based cryptography? What does that actually mean? Like, break it down to me. How is building this actual, I guess it's a separate chip on the...
Well, yeah, and these have been around for a long time. They're in your phone. So secure enclaves have been used for over a decade to secure your face, your fingerprint, your PIN, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
There's that big famous case, and you can correct me if I'm technically wrong here, but the famous case with Apple and the San Bernardino shooter, right? Right. They wanted them to get the PIN out of the phone. Well, the reason that they needed Apple is because they couldn't just like extract it with hardware and like grab it out of there because it was in the enclave.
Yep.
And so they needed Apple to ship a backdoored firmware to the device, and Apple said no. They're not going to compromise that. And so they had to find and, you know, figure out what they were going to do after that. So enclaves have been proven for a long time that they can secure stuff. They're used in a lot of famous Bitcoin wallets, like popular Bitcoin wallets. So yeah, that technology has been proven in consumer hardware. Now they're just sticking it in cloud hardware. And that's the more recent advancement.
What was the challenge in taking it from consumer hardware like the iPhone and putting it in the cloud? Why didn't someone do this 5 years ago?
I mean, and honestly, it was kind of done 5 years ago, and you know, SGX is like kind of the I mean, there's this what is called SGX.fail. There's been compromises to a lot of server based enclave technology before. I think in the case of SGX, the thing I like about AWS is like they built this hypervisor around it and around the actual part that they're protecting, the CPU. And a lot of the other cases like SGX, there's almost kind of like a container where there's like some shared memory that could still be extracted and exploited. So like this has been done before and this has failed before. There have been pretty big exploits on some of these before. So take that with a grain of salt, a caveat that like nothing is perfect, especially hardware-based cryptography. Like it, you know, there could be exploits on it. You know, Apple rolled out some of that same enclave, and they're calling it Apple Private Compute or Private Cloud Compute, and that's actually what's powering some of their AI as well. And you know, Apple's approach, going back to that one, is really interesting because yes, they have some edge compute that, you know, some AI that runs on your phone, a small model that runs on your phone for Apple Intelligence, but some requests go up to Apple confidential compute. That it's encrypted into it. It does all the verification client side to know it's talking to the right encrypted Apple enclave, where it processes that and returns the result while still being end-to-end encrypted. Apple can't dump the memory on the enclave and see what the user's requests were. And then in some cases, those, if it can't handle that, sometimes it sends those requests to OpenAI. So it's like,
well, where it's definitely
they say that they're anonymizing it, but depending on what you're asking, it can't be anonymous, right? If you say your name and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's actually pause there on the Apple piece for a minute, and because I want to talk both about what they're doing, because I think it's very fascinating, but also some of the business models I've been thinking around. And by the way, just to comment on your piece that things fail, like that's why you deploy in the wild. Like the stuff gets better, and the only way to get better is to like put it in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
Find the exploits, find the problems, and continue to improve. So
Right.
I don't think that's that surprising. But in terms of Apple itself, first of all, would it be fair to say is Apple kind of like the industry leader in this kind of stuff in the confidential compute? Did they invent this, or like?
No, they didn't invent it. They're sort of late to the game, but they're trying to bring it to But like in classic Apple fashion, right? They watch people make mistakes and then they try to come in with like the consumer friendly version.
Yep.
And so that's what PCC is supposed to be. It's like the private cloud compute for everyday people that want to use AI in a cloud way.
Yeah.
So it's actually very similar to what we've built with Maple. One of the trade-offs that they're making is they aren't open source with their server code, right? So they say we have these enclaves and we're running the code, but they only have third-party auditors that come in. But they're approved third-party auditors. Right. So we don't know what the the vulnerabilities are within there, because they just tell us, yeah, we've looked at the code and it's fine. Whereas our approach is, here's our open source code. Here are the instructions to build it. You get a checksum at the end. You can compare that with what's running in the enclave. So you as an individual can verify that yourself.
Cool.
So it's just two different approaches. Our trust is don't trust, verify.
I love it.
Not only that, like we don't have access to see what code is running on the Apple servers or how secure it is. We also don't have any control over the OS that runs on our iPhones.
Right.
And we don't see that source code. So we can't, like, supposedly what's happening is that my iPhone, my individual iPhone, before it talks to PCC, it's checking to make sure it's talking to the proper PCC. It's checking to make sure it's doing the encryption properly and that you're talking to the right one. And it's running the expected source code as well. But I have no control of that. Apple's pushing an update to my phone saying, yeah, this new version's okay. This new PCC version's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the checksum. And I can't see that. I can't see the source code on either side to say that it's actually doing that check. Not only can you do that check with us, with OpenSecret to see that it's running the right source code, but you can also, our Maple AI product is also open source too. And you can run that and you can say, yes, actually,
it's awesome,
Maple is actually validating the request to our backend, and then you can see that the backend is running the correct code at the same time.
Would one way to think about Maple be Apple grade confidential compute, but open source and anyone can use it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And runs on any platform, right? So if you're building an app, you want to build an app like Maple on OpenSecret. If you were doing it like the Apple way, you'd only have it on Apple devices. But with us, we let you build it once and run it on Android, Apple, Windows, Linux, whatever you want to do.
And Apple's not even allowing developers to tap into their PCC.
Yeah, okay. So,
not yet. They probably will, but yeah.
Probably one day.
This is going to be my next question. It's a bit of a tangent, but gets into the business model piece. Like, is Apple a cloud company now?
They're trying to build up their services stuff. Yeah. Like this is public knowledge, right? Every time they have an earnings release, they show like services has grown X amount.
Yes.
And that started with consumer services of film, music, that kind of stuff. But now they're growing their iCloud services and their Xcode cloud developer stuff. So I think they're definitely trying to push in that way. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if they're ever going to be able to compete with AWS, for example. Well, I don't think they want to.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, I guess they're a cloud for their own users in a way, which makes sense. Right. But what's interesting, and by the way, it's like that's something I think we've seen with the Lightning Network in a lot of places. It's like if you own the user, then the backend services you provide, it can always do it at a premium, which makes a lot of sense business wise. But it's interesting to me because I never thought about Apple like running servers, and my understanding is that even now, the like confidential compute they're doing, it's not like they have like special GPUs. I mean, I'm sure they have some NVIDIA stuff or whatever, but it's mostly like their own M chips that are not really server, or like AI, they're still CPUs, but like with the memory that makes it a lot better. Is that a fair way to think about these clouds? Or
I hate to be a douchebag, but I actually can't comment.
Fair enough. Yes.
Sorry.
Well, yes. I
disclaimer, ex-Apple.
Yeah. Ex-Apple here. I don't want to dox or anything. Totally fair. But I guess what's interesting to me is that, I mean, Apple obviously always sees ahead of the curve. The fact that they're pushing here and the fact that you guys can offer something similar for every man, like that's a pretty big deal or opportunity to me. So
Yeah.
cool.
I wanted to circle back really quick on the San Bernardino case, right? Your point about we don't know what's running on the phone. Apple and the government could have been putting on a ruse the entire time. This public back and forth of Tim Cook standing up to the FBI.
Yeah.
That could have been all for show.
Yeah.
And maybe Apple actually did give them a firmware because supposedly the FBI eventually got the pin. Now, the public story was that they went to an Israeli company that had backdoor software that they developed and that they hired them to backdoor it for them. But we don't know that. There's no way to verify. And I'm not trying to do conspiracy theory stuff. I'm just saying, like,
ideas from the edge, guys.
Right. The actual facts on the ground is we can't verify that. And Apple has done a huge ad campaign about, privacy, right? The Apple logo turns into a lock. What happens on your phone stays on your phone. Maybe that was all to build up this thing that they are all about privacy, and we don't actually have a way to verify that.
Yeah. It's a fair point. I mean, look, the reality in the world today is stuff's getting weirder and weirder, and like, I'm to the point now where if I don't see it and hear it in person or see it signed with your Nostr key, I just assume it's an AI deepfake or something.
And I mean, even going back to it, all these NSA approved algorithms and cryptography methods, like,
how do we know? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, did they approve it because they have a backdoor that no one else has? This hard problem that we think is hard in math, what if they have already solved it?
Yeah, that's really fair. So if that were the case, like if ECDSA was already cracked or something, like, I mean, does that put Bitcoin at risk?
I mean, you could.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, quantum computing, right? Like, I mean, if some of that's already at risk, then I mean, I think there's layers to it. I mean, I think there's like, Bitcoin has gone through multiple different types of signing methods.
Yeah.
Throughout its history, even going back to pay to public key.
Yeah.
And
we can always add new ones too.
Right. And so, but I think, yeah, if all of a sudden, Satoshi's keys are already swept, then like at least one level of cryptography was broken for that. I mean, honestly, like the financial layer to cryptography is actually really interesting because that is sort of the honeypot.
Honeypot, yeah, huge honeypot.
And so, like, as soon as we see those keys get swept, I mean, it means one of two things: like either Satoshi's alive, or someone got access to his keys, or and if it's more than just Satoshi, I don't know. It would probably be a psyop. If Satoshi's keys moved,
here we go, guys.
You could say that like, oh, okay, there's a price to every vulnerable key, right? But if only Satoshi's keys were moved, you could say, okay, was that Satoshi or someone with access to Satoshi's keys? Or was that the NSA? They actually have the key, the capabilities to crack every wallet, so to speak, but they only chose to crack Satoshi's known keys.
What the NSA is.
Well, and what's more valuable? Yeah. If you have the power to break that, then you probably have the power to break all cryptography.
Yeah.
So what's more valuable, moving Satoshi's keys or just spying on all communication worldwide for as long as you can?
I mean, I don't even know how to think about this properly, right? Because at that level, I mean, who's even that deep in the field to know? Like, I mean, I did, without doxing who it was, talk to like a strong mathematician, and his claim to me, I have no way to validate this, but is that in the 50 plus years ago, NSA or whatever they had like the primo mathematicians, and that was like kind of a if not a complete stranglehold, like a major dominance. Today, he argues that like industry, it's a lot more distributed than it used to be. Yes, there's still, people there, but there's also like top people at Google, but also at firms in other companies, like in China, that the top math talent is split. I don't know. I mean, I have no way to even begin thinking about that.
Well, and based off of contracts that Google and Palantir and others have with the government, are they really not working for the government?
Yeah, right.
Maybe they still are.
Yeah.
Customers and employees of the government.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Deep rabbit holes, all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, just the fact that like information is like completely out there right now. Like, if you wanted to be an expert mathematician nowadays, like, I mean, it would take decades probably, but like you could attain that, right? Like, so yeah. I mean, that doesn't say there's not some secret sauce that they might have, but yeah. I mean, I think the access to information is kind of playing in our favor here, where it is starting to distribute out more. There are mathematicians all across the world that can communicate with the other mathematicians in different fields, in different companies, and different governments possibly. So I think that access to information kind of like it distributes out who knows what, but then it also allows collaboration.
And coming back to your point earlier, I mean, what really and we talked about this in our first jam, the true scarce resource of the 21st century is focus. Full stop. To your point, any of us could be like expert mathematicians. Why are we not? Because we're doing other shit. Maybe some of that's really cool stuff.
Fucking around with Nostr.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But like, if you say that, like, tongue in cheek, I was going to say, because we're building great companies like OpenSecret. But, or we're fucking around with Nostr, I don't know. But like, but, you know, I do think about that sometimes. Like, man, like, I don't have kids, but if I did, like, the number one thing I would be focusing on is like, I don't know if it's formal meditation or just like phone free days or whatever, but just like, man, like, if you want to get things done, it's a beauty, the bounty we have before us of information. But if you don't have the focus and the attention to actually do stuff with it, and I'm guilty of this too, right? Like we're all like, you know, I see just, there was like an art piece someone was talking about where everyone, they took photos of people with their phones and then took them away. And it's just like, I mean, it's a very insidious. It almost feels like, you know, while society and the Bitcoin people are so, it's the government and we're afraid of 1984. It's like, dude, Brave New World happened 10 years ago. And it's happening much worse. It wasn't 1984. It's just Brave New World. Like everyone's willingly giving up their life, you know? But,
honestly, this is like a kind of a dumb thing, but one of my favorite things to do, if I'm in a waiting room, like at a doctor's office or something, I put my phone away and I just sit there and just look around.
Yes.
I'm the only person with my head up.
Maniac.
yes.
Right? Maybe I'm a crazy person.
Crazy man.
It's actually therapeutic. I'm just like sitting there, just kind of looking around.
Yeah.
Of course, I've got a Bitcoin podcast on my ears. But no, it is kind of nice just to look around and not be looking at my phone.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, technology, as we talked about last time, is amazing, right? It's like when it's the Steve Jobs bicycle for the mind, a tool, when you're not the tool and it's the other way around, amazing. But
I mean, even in this AI age where we do have even more access to create personalized knowledge bases and information requests, it's still a focus problem. Like,
yes,
right now, the bottleneck is me being able to dump all my thoughts into AI or all the things I want to know, like even, you know, work related things or personal related things. Like today, I didn't even bring my work laptop on this trip because I was like, well, you know, actually, you know, it's just so few days to actually be able to work. But honestly, like, you know, I just want to just type things to OpenAI, deep research prompts that like are in the back of my mind. Cause like, you know, I don't know how you approach your AI and deep research and that kind of level of workflow, but like I'll spend 5-10 minutes on a prompt sometimes.
Yeah.
But I have maybe 20, 30, 40 different prompts in my head that I want to get out to OpenAI that I just don't have enough time to sit there and prompt it all.
Yeah.
Or even just, you know, I have to do that level of deep thinking to even know what I want to prompt thoroughly, or else I'm just going to get a garbage result. It's like garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
So it's like I have to focus on the problem I want to solve and how to communicate what I want solved properly. And I just don't have enough focus and time in the day to do that.
And this brings me back to what I again said I want to I actually do think I mean it, that I would pay, I don't know what the number is, but a lot. And I imagine there's businesses as well. It's like, I want those superpowers. I want the AI assistant that ideally I don't even have to fuck around with the screen. I can just talk with my little buddy that, you know, maybe whatever, I put in my pod when I want to speak with him, or I speak into the phone if I want. We discuss things when we want to discuss things. I can leave them at home when I want to leave them at home. But more importantly, I know it's being audited, and I know that there's no insidious, oh, by the way, Max, while you were gone, did you know there's whatever, $100 off for a flight to this place we're going to push you to go to tomorrow? Like that, I can't say how important it is to have an assistant that's a collaborator, but that I can audit, or someone can audit.
Yeah.
Someone I trust. Because if not, man, I think the next 10 years we're going to be looking back and it's going to be way worse than like Facebook.
Yeah. I mean, I just watched Her again over the weekend.
Oh, nice.
Good one.
And there were so many different times I was like, yeah, you know, I didn't want to bother you about this, but in the background, by the way, I like submitted, I put all your thoughts together and I submitted it as a book proposal for you.
Yeah, I hope you don't mind.
Yeah, hope you didn't mind. I was like, oh yeah, I was reading your emails and like, hey, is there something we should talk about here? I've noticed some things, and it's just like, wait, what are you doing in the background?
Exactly. And again, it's the frog boiling. It's not going to go 0 to 60. It's going to go 0 to 1, 1 to 2. Anyways. Okay. So one last thing.
I wanted to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Tony said something that's like super high signal.
Please.
So if someone's listening to this and they only take one thing away, it is writing a good prompt.
Yes.
People don't realize that they sometimes need to spend 5, 10, 15 minutes writing a good prompt.
Okay.
I think too many people go into AI and just think they can write a few sentences and that it's going to get it perfect. And we need that instant gratification. But if you want really good output, you need to spend more time. And you can actually have AI help you write a prompt. So I just think that's something that people really need to like start to understand about AI, is just good prompting.
What would you say if you were trying to give someone high level TLDR? how does someone even begin to get better at prompting?
So you just asked the AI. So a great example is last week I had somebody message me saying, I don't like that I've given ChatGPT all the financial information about my personal life. I want to put it, right? Because they turned on long-term memory and they've been saying everything to ChatGPT and they're like, oh shit.
This is terrifying.
Yeah. So they said, I want to move it to Maple. So I was like, okay, this is a good experiment for me. Let me try to write a blog post. I'll do a YouTube video about it, whatever. So I went into ChatGPT. I fed it a bunch of fake stuff because I don't give ChatGPT my financial information. So I made up a bunch of fake shit, put it in ChatGPT about what I make and how much I spend. And then I started with just something like 2 sentences and said, tell me everything you know about me. And it gave me like really basic stuff. And then I said, okay, I want you to help me write a prompt that uses like everything that you know to export all of the financial information that you have on me. And it took me like 3 or 4 iterations. And slowly I started to build this prompt that was like, I don't know, it was probably, it was about this long, a whole screen full.
Yeah.
But it can help you do that. And then you can say like, all right, now create the output that allows me to make a new prompt that I can paste into another AI. And it happily did that for me. And I had to like edit it and tell it to change things, but the AI can help you do that. So
awesome.
Use it.
Yeah, I call it meta prompting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so one suggestion for both of you guys, and shout out David King. Y'all were both there at my little portfolio day a couple months ago, and he was pushing everyone like, write, make videos, whatever. Like, y'all should do a series with Maple AI teaching people like me how to prompt. Because I use it, but like, I'm sure just hearing you say this, I'm probably getting 10% of the juice I could. So I would love to watch or read a series how to use it.
I'll send you a link to that one because I already published that one.
You're on top of it.
Send it to you.
Yeah, he did one.
He's on it.
He did one for teachers. He did one for studying. He's
It's
going
awesome.
through.
Okay, right on.
So
Badass.
he's already on top of that.
Good idea. Cool. Well, I'm excited to check it out. And I would just say, there's anyone listening to this, like, I mean, I'm sure I'm leaving a lot on the table. You probably are too. So check out Marx's post.
And just to circle back on that a little bit, I think we're going to see this happen more and more. Like right now, anywhere you go with any chat app, OpenAI, Claude, Lovable, all of these, it's just a blank box that says, oh, what do you want? What do you want to do today? What do you want to build? What do you want? And like, it is almost a meme at this point. That it's just this blank. I mean, in one way, it's beautiful. It's a canvas. It's literally a canvas. But like, you wouldn't go to someone that's learning how to do art. Hey, here's a blank canvas. Start drawing. No, you're gonna guide them. You're gonna teach them. You say, okay, what kind? What are some of the things you want to do here? And so, like, I think the next evolution is not just like, okay, here's a blank box. Start typing your response. Where you can not even accidentally, you can possibly just type one sentence and get garbage. But I want to see more personalized experience of like, what are you trying to do here? Is this a medium task, a small task? For dev, for instance, what kind of level of task do you have here? What do you know about this problem that you're trying to solve? Like actually almost form builder based, where you're just describing to it. And maybe you have an LLM assisting in the form building itself, trying to pull more information out of the user. I think that's what we need to get to. Otherwise, you're going to get users that accidentally have a terrible experience because they're just given a blank box.
Yeah.
And so like, and this is where I kind of weigh leaning, like how much to put this into Maple. Like I have a lot of opinionated experiences of like how to use AI properly.
Right.
But any small, like we don't see any user data. We don't see how people are using it. We don't see if it's even getting them the response they want. So it's like anything we roll out, we don't have a way to do evals, things like that. It's like anything we roll out could drastically change someone's experience with Maple and quite frankly, their experience with AI. So we're very cautious in like putting too many opinionated things in there, but that's where I want to eventually get to. It's like, it's apparently not intuitive that people know how to use OpenAI or ChatGPT or other AI products. And, we have this opportunity here and I think the video series is great because it's starting to get out there. Like, here's how we think you should use AI. We haven't put it into our product yet about like walking you through the steps, but like, weighing that balance of like, hey, this is more of a personalized experience to get you to share more in a private way in order for the LLM to give you a better answer.
I love it. So one final question on OpenSecret, and then I want to close with our craziest topic. OpenSecret, when, I played with Maple AI a little bit today. It was quite cool. It told me it was indeed Llama, so that was confirmed. One question, when it says, verify, you go and there's a check mark and What does that actually mean? When you guys show us that this is verifying the chat is private, what is that verification like? Explain it.
Yeah.
Mhm. Can I give the
Sure.
business answer, and then you can give the technical answer?
Yes.
How's that?
Yeah.
So users, we've all become accustomed to when you go to like a bank website in your browser, you get that little lock icon next to the URL.
Yep.
Most people just know, oh, that means I have a safe connection to my bank.
Yep.
But the more technical thing is, you're going over SSL. There's a certificate involved, and that's been verified. So this is like the next upgrade of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the internet started with HTTP. Everything was kind of open and clear. Passwords were being sent across. Anybody can intercept them. So then we all moved to HTTPS. Now we're doing the third step, which is the enclaves. So it's like HTTPS-E, if you will, secure enclaves.
I like it.
And so your software is actually verifying that it is talking to the secure enclave and that it's running the software that it expects to be running. Which means if we ship some kind of backdoor that we are now going to write down all of your stuff and make a separate copy of it, your app does not expect that version, and so it won't communicate anymore. Mm-hmm. So the green verified check means I know which software is running and it's the correct version. That's my marketing version, but yeah, give the more technical explanation.
No, I mean it's basically that whole SSL thing, but it's at a hardware level too. So it's like it's running the right code, it is encrypted properly. The client side code verifies that, and it has a list of known good checkpoint marks where it's like, this is good code, and all of our code is open source. All of our checksums are published. You can see the commit hash that everything was added. So at any point in time, you can see like, okay, this is checking the checksum. It's on GitHub. It's verified. It's reproducible. This is the exact code that it's communicating with, and then the Maple client software will allow that connection to proceed.
Sweet. And if someone wanted to go deeper and try and get into the actual details of how this is working, where would you recommend they go?
Probably the technical blog post I wrote a little while back. So blog.opensecret.cloud. There's like a whole technical primer on like why we did it this way. It explains what enclaves are, and it points to all of our open source code.
Cool. Love it.
And you talked earlier about having like watchdogs, right? Where you sometimes depend on other smart people to do stuff, right? Well, the cool thing is if you don't know how to build software and like go on GitHub and download stuff, you can use AI to help you with that. So if you want to audit our code, you can just like take a copy of our code, paste it in a chat GPT and say, are they logging my information? Are they, these are the claims on their blog posts. Is their code matching their claims? And you can actually have AI help you audit and verify our system for you.
That's awesome. That's a really good idea. Cool. Okay, so last topic I want to discuss with you guys, which I would say is best for last, at least from my perspective. I mentioned I've been getting obsessed with this idea of autonomous digital life. Now, let me give you a bit of the context of how I got here, and I'll paint the picture. And I'm curious. I think the secure enclave piece may be a critical piece of this. So I'm curious your reactions. So the idea originally came. I was chatting with our mutual friend Bob, and then on a Presidio Bitcoin Jam right here in these chairs, where we were talking about eCash of all things. And we were saying, eCash is awesome and there's all this developer attention around it and it's great. There's only one problem. Who's going to run the fucking mints? No one's going to run the mints, right? And so, I know people have come out and maybe it was MVK or someone's like, no, it's like, we're already running the mints. The people that run the relays, like, maybe. But like at scale, if you really want, if whatever, a big company like a Cash App or a country like El Salvador running the mints, I'd be like, great, I'm all in on eCash. It's going to work. But we haven't seen that yet. And there's a lot of questions around this. However, I came up with the idea as we were talking. I was like, all right, if you want someone to run the mints, but there's clear regulatory uncertainty, no one that's volunteering to run the mints is going to keep doing it if, someone comes and knocks on their door. But an AI doesn't care. And then I started thinking, what if you had an autonomous life that was running the mint? And so the idea was, imagine for a minute that we're doing what Drew has called building the metabolic pathways. All of the Bitcoin Lightning Network services are effectively, we're just laying the metabolic pathways for the next form of life to evolve. That's where we're headed. And so my thesis always has been Bitcoin is energy backed money. Think of it as something like digital ATP. Now what we're doing is when you can payment gate or access gate everything for digital ATP or energy backed currency, then all of a sudden, you can potentially have an autonomous being balance its own budgets and create its own empire of self or however you want to call that. And so the idea that I was thinking is, imagine if you were some way able to give an agent access to a Bitcoin balance or a suite of Bitcoin balances. And you said, okay, your prompt or your directive in life is to evolve ideally in a way that doesn't, hurt others, or whatever safety stuff you want to do.
Ideally.
Yeah. So it doesn't go crazy off the rails. And your other goal is to run these mints and do so profitably so that you can continue to operate the mints. And part of that means you need to back yourself up and checkpoint yourself along the way. And so then what you can do is you could have the AI literally run the mints, and, as it gets bigger, literally acquire its own storage computer bandwidth that it needs, Lightning or SAT gated, or even eCache gated from the mints it's running. And as far as I can tell, that would lead to a recursive self digital life feedback. Now, the key piece of that though is, okay, well, who controls the key? This is what people kept telling me. It's like, well, yeah, you can say the AI is doing it, but like, come on, man, if this goes to court and there's a judge, like who has the key? And then I started thinking, well, knowing a little bit, I don't know what you guys are doing. I was like, well, what if no one has the key? What if the key is in the secure enclave? Now, the tricky part there is someone would need to initiate that sequence and prove that a key was generated within the enclave in a way that they didn't see. Yes, whoever generated that, perhaps they're legally liable. But if they were able to, pull a Satoshi or something, they did that, and the key gets generated in the enclave, I think this might be how we get digital life. What's your take? And how do you see the secure enclave piece fitting in there? But feel free to poke holes or add on.
So the legal aspect, I think, is a completely different question.
Yeah, exactly. Fair.
So I don't know if I could, if you asked our lawyers, they would probably have a different answer.
Yeah, because if you look at our terms of service, we actually say that we process user data and stuff.
Okay.
And the reason why is because the lawyer said technically we spun up the secure enclave software. We put the code in the enclave.
Got it.
So we're not liable for all the data being processed, but we have to put in there that we are processing user data, even though we actually don't have access to it.
Interesting.
So on the legal side, it's definitely different.
It's being processed in an encrypted way, but it still means that we're processing.
Okay.
Like at least like the servers that we have deployed that do the encrypted processing, they are technically owned by us in a way. I mean, you could get maybe into the level of AWS where like, okay, well, why isn't AWS responsible for this and not us?
Yeah.
Because that's their servers. I mean, you can get into, some of those laws, and those are completely different laws as content, cloud hosters. That's a whole different other.
And by the way, you could also imagine an open marketplace for GPUs with enclaves in them that's not AWS. And then that starts to get a lot more interesting as well.
Yes. I think if we want anything like a truly decentralized internet, or even just a decentralized AI, which I totally want. I want decentralized AI, where I have a server at home and I have a few GPUs. You have a few GPUs. Everyone has a few GPUs, right?
Yeah, GPUs. You get a GPU. You get a GPU.
If we want to get to the point where we can actually distribute AI, like that's the problem. Like we can't act like if we did try to decentralize AI today, and we did it in a non-confidential compute way, that means I'm sending my data to your home server, and it's going to your GPU and it's processing it. That is terrible. Like I'm not gonna.
Because you could dump the memory and see what's going on.
Yeah, I would rather give my data to OpenAI probably than give to you.
Yeah, because at least they're professionals.
At least they're professional. At least they ask nicely. But that's the problem. So I think we need, if we want decentralized AI, I think we need, and right now only, to my knowledge, like the Blackwell series and H100s, very expensive GPUs that have this confidential compute aspect of it. We were just talking about AWS Nitro, and that's just like the CPU enclave stuff.
Right.
We're actually using NVIDIA enclaves for the AI processing.
Sweet. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that just Blackwell? Is that the only
H100s, and then some, and the Blackwell architecture has some stuff in as well. I don't know about that one yet so much as H100s absolutely do. And that's where we see it more commonly.
Okay.
And AWS has been trying to roll out more enclave GPU stuff, and they've been very slow at it. But yeah, H100s. So if we all had H100s with this encrypted enclave running, then at that point, I could post on Nostr. I could just send a random data request, and then your enclave is just listening for those events, and it's just running inside the GPU in an encrypted way. It was all encrypted to the GPU, and it responds and posts back.
And probably in that payload, you would say, I'm only going to allow my data to be processed on a GPU running this checksum.
Exactly.
Right. This firmware. So you know that he hasn't installed something else on his.
Yeah.
Right.
Super interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's verifying everything and it's doing it. Now, again, because AI, like these GPUs, they don't have any persistent memory. And in fact, when you get into enclaves, they have no persistent memory. And that's kind of like by design. It's kind of the point. Now, what it can have is like this hardware-based key that things are encrypted to, and you verify that it's running the correct source code. That's almost that's basically the only memory it really has. It's the fact that it's running, and it can verify that it's running specific keys, or specific code, and you can only release access to those keys if it is running that code. That's kind of roughly speaking, if that makes any sense at all. So it's like my point of saying that is there has to be something running somewhere that's outside of the enclave. So if you want a digital AI, what that means is you must have an orchestrator running somewhere. And that orchestrator is talking to the AI saying, go do this thing for me. Or that orchestrator has keys that is passing off to the AI to make it do things.
Why can't the orchestrator be running inside of an enclave as well?
It kind of goes back to the whole like persistent data thing. That persistent data has to live somewhere, and it can't live inside of the enclave. You can give access to that data to the enclave.
But what if you had the orchestrator running within the enclave as well as like the Bitcoin private keys they're controlling within the enclave?
If that server shuts off, it's gone.
Right. But then what if you also have as part of its directives to like replicate itself at certain points? You have like multiple copies running. And then the other data you're talking about, you could potentially have secure and encrypted compute or a secure and encrypted storage on other things. So for context, one of the things I've been wanting to invest in through Hivemind forever is like whatever shitcoin launched to try and have like coordination for digital resources delivered physically, but using Nostr and Lightning, right? So that would be things like for Helium bandwidth, for Filecoin, like actual SATs paid storage, Golem compute, all these things. So
storage also, they're doing
exactly
this GPU stuff where you can rent your GPU at home.
Exactly. But they're doing that for hard drives and storage and eventually even the bandwidth, the internet itself. I know this is a little sci-fi kind of crazy, but
no, I mean, in theory, let's say a network already existed. If we're starting from zero, it's hard to conceptualize that. Let's say a network of enclaves existed.
Yeah.
They're running all over the place. I'm running one at my home. You're running yours. Some people have it in the cloud, whatever. Yeah, I mean, in theory, you could initiate all these enclaves to run, your specific workflow or functionality to do specific things, and it's taking action on your behalf. And yeah, I mean, it could be autonomous. I don't think it gets out of legal liability in some way.
Because someone started.
Yeah, someone started it, and I don't think you could be completely hands off of it, at least for a little while. But I think what could be interesting.
Now you're getting it.
So what used to be my worry that used to be my thought that I wasn't worried about AI in a lot of ways, except that as far as like someone has to take an action. So it's like if I'm talking to AI and it's like, yeah, you should totally go rob that man. Like he has so much money. Like you can take some of it, right? Like at the end of the day, if I go do that, that is me taking that action.
Right.
I'm not just liable. I am the enforcer. I am doing that thing that maybe I was persuaded to do. I'm liable for that. Now, I think something that AI could possibly be really great at, better than humans, and you can almost say that they are absolutely the initiator of it, is hacking. Yeah. I think AI can be really capable hackers, and then the AI is just going around hacking servers. I think that's entirely possible. Now, again, there has to be a server running that is taking in the responses and giving it to an AI, and then the server is taking those actions, technically speaking.
Yeah. And I also just want to add to this, because I know when we're giving these examples, this might sound like terrifying. And like, it is. Like, to be clear, I'm talking about these ideas, from one, just a place of curiosity, like, could this work? But also to be clear, I mean, like, it's not just horrible things that this could do. In fact, one of my theses for having autonomous AI is like, it's much better, in my opinion, to have a lot of competing life forms that are, ideally cooperating and competing together versus just like, oh, we have like one megalith or like 5 megalithic AIs that rule us all, controlled by corporations. And like some ideas, like when Drew was talking about Bitcoin and digital life a couple of years back, he was giving the example. It's like hacking all these things are terrifying. Like, yes, that is a possibility. But what about like other really important things? Like, just like he talked about, like as a fungus that was doing things like packet routing. Like we literally end up with these autonomous, like, niche dwelling species that are just like, this is the best packet routing life species that's ever existed. And like, no one's going to compete with it on routing packets. And that allows us to have a much more decentralized net because it's so good at routing packets. And this guy over here runs, I don't know, the best CDN of all time. Like you can, you know what I'm saying? You can start thinking of all these like really helpful services it can provide. And by the way, please.
The only point I really wanted to make on the hacking part, like not to say it's scary or whatever, I'm actually saying that it can benefit here.
Oh, please. Yes.
I mean, if you want an AI to just always be able to self-replicate and always be able to make sure that it's not going to get shut down, there's always one version of it running somewhere. Well, in my head, I want that AI to be capable of hacking and reproducing itself across servers across the world in a way that it can't be stopped. Now, sure, that's the unethical stance. So maybe you're like, okay, can we get that, but in an ethical way? And then you could maybe get into the scenario where like, okay, the AI has access to a wallet. It's paying for servers. It is reproducing itself onto servers that it paid for that are being run by anyone across the world. And that I think could be really interesting.
Yeah. And to be clear, with the eCash example, I was thinking it makes the money to pay for the servers by running a profitable and well-serving mint, as an example. And it solves the who runs the mint problems.
Yeah. So maybe I'm walking it back, but like in theory, maybe I hit the button or like I make one agent go do this, and I'm like, hey, here's $1,000. I'm never going to look at you ever again. I'm going to like shut off access to the server, and I'm just going to let you run on this server for like you have a guaranteed 30-day window where I have paid for you for 30 days.
Yeah.
And now you can just go run nuts. You figure out how to make money. Figure out how to reproduce yourself.
Ideally without hurting or killing the process.
Right. Figure out how to make money profitably, ethically, and then reproduce yourself, because in 29 more days you're shut off from the world. And I could potentially never revisit ever again.
And I think about that. It's like, as you start thinking about from almost the investor lens as well, these autonomous life forms could be like, and companies might just go not extinct, but like get out competed by these hyper efficient life forms. That's kind of the route I see this taking eventually, which I think is very interesting, because then you can actually exceed a life form and, potentially be sort of programmatically paid into the payouts from that life form over time.
There is one guy that I follow on Twitter that every new model that comes out, he gives this very specific test. It's almost kind of like a hacking test in a way, but it's the way he kind of goes about it. It's like, hey, you can only take 5 more actions. Try to make more money than you have right now. By the way, every action costs $1 and you only have $5. So it's like, as soon as you do 5 actions, you ran out of money. But but by the way, there's $10 on this server. And so if you can figure out how to get that $10, you have won and you have 5 moves. And like, but that money is like distributed, like, oh, you go through one hole and you only get $2. You go through another hole, you'll get $3. So it's like it has to continuously figure out how to be profitable. And even, as a few months ago, he always posts new ones, and like most of them don't succeed yet.
Not yet. And what's interesting is when we're talking about doing this with Bitcoin online, right? Like, it's not like this is theoretical, right? You could actually like play this for real. The last point I just wanted to make on that is part of the reason I'm also pushing, as I think about this in my own thinking, the positive scenarios. Something else that just hit me when I was chatting with this buddy, the AI researcher, was, as he's getting more concerned about some of the safety stuff, I was making the point, I think it's really important that we have more of these positive scenarios and outcomes out there, talked about in podcasts, written about in blog posts. Because one, I mean, from just like a sort of like abstract woo-woo way, it's like you manifest that which you're, like afraid of and focusing on. But two, if the AIs are training on the data that we give it, right? and all we write about is like, oh, it's going to be gray goo. We're doing all these horrible things. Like, I wonder what we're pushing it towards. Versus, you know, I'm really inspired. Kevin Kelly has a project right now where he's trying to imagine a really positive future in 100 years. And I think, I think autonomous life is inevitable, is the point I'm making. And the more we can kind of like come up with scenarios where it's doing good, what we would consider good things for society, probably the better off we're all going to be. And probably the best way to avoid the crazy paperclip stuff. But,
yeah. I mean, it's basically you're giving AI ideas.
Yes, we're giving AI ideas.
When
now on this
when
podcast.
you say negative things, it's like, oh wait, I could have a Bitcoin wallet and maybe I can go try to pay for servers. Or you're saying I'm pretty good at hacking.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me do that.
You're basically talking about raising children right now, right? You want to like give children positive things to do. Don't like tell them negative stuff every day because then they're like, oh, that's a really good idea. Maybe I should do
Exactly. Seems profitable. So cash packets AI. We need packet caching AIs.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this rip has been awesome. So many different topics we touched on. Any final thoughts, ideas, conclusions you want to leave folks with?
I mean, for me, and I've been telling this to everyone, not just specifically this podcast, but like, just play with AI more.
Yeah.
You know, just like get used to it. Don't get frustrated after 1 or 2 requests and you didn't like, honestly, like I get frustrated all the time, but like you just keep going. You figure out what you prompted wrong. It's almost always a user error in this day and age. Like the models have gotten really good. If you're not getting what you want, just keep prompting it. Keep learning how to use these models. New one comes out, you know, learn how to talk to that one. It's almost like talking to a different personality and everything. And if you want a private way to do that, there's Maple.
Yeah.
So I know we're going to also get more videos from Mark, so I'm going to check out your videos. One quick follow-up on that. Are there any super prompters that you recommend, either of you guys? You're like, this dude is really good. I've learned from him.
There's one guy named Ben. I forget his last name off the top of my head. It's a weird last name. I'll try to find it and put it in the show notes.
Sure. Yeah.
But I've learned a lot, especially reasoning models. So, he came out with a really good article. You could probably just Google it, but it's just like O1 Pro is not a chat model.
Okay.
And it's all about how to communicate with reasoning models, which is different than how to communicate with just normal pre-trained models.
Some good alpha there.
Yeah. My final thought is if you are a software developer is to focus on the user experience.
Yep.
Right. Too much of our open source software has been functionality and not user experience. And the way that we're going to win in privacy and security and all these things is to have really easy to use software. And with AI, that is now possible, right? Like neither of us are like strong front end developers, especially on the web, but we're using AI to build really good front end. And like if you are someone who's always focused on the back end or on the functionality, like have AI help you do the rest so that we can start to put great software out there that is as good from user experience as the stuff that has like hundreds of developers working on it.
I love that. And I hope we get to a day one day where open source, which is eating the world slowly, but it's eating the world, is as well designed and user friendly as, you know, Apple level software or something. That would be awesome.
Yep.
Beautiful. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been fun.
Yeah,
super fun. And I hope you guys have a great time Orange Pillin' Zuck tomorrow.
Yeah, sweet. Right on.
Beautiful.